The COVID-19 crisis has severely strained African economies and undermined decades of economic progress. What policy measures can African governments put in place to help their economies rebound? Earlier on, we spoke to Mavis Owusu-Gyamfi, the Executive Vice President of the African Center for Economic Transformation, for more.
At ACET, we have 4 things that government needs to do. Firstly, as we move to the restructuring phase, governments need to focus on boosting voluntary compliance. This can be achieved by ensuring that they are demonstrating competence, accountability, and fairness. There is no better way to boost the social contract between taxpayers and government by doing this. Taxpayers will feel more confident about paying their taxes if they feel that they know how governments are spending it. Secondly, simplify tax collection. Use the emergence of digital during COVID to introduce ICT tools such as online tax filing systems. This will help to boost tax collection and reduce administration costs whilst plugging leakages within the tax system. Thirdly, tackle tax exemptions and put in place measures to stem tax evasion. Governments can make substantially more, governments can increase their GDP revenues by 2 to 3% if they block tax loopholes within the system right now. And thirdly, they can broaden the tax net in the long term to include the larger informal sector. So as we go into the phase of restructuring and rebuilding, and businesses start to grow, governments have the opportunity to broaden their tax base by including the informal sector.
Yes, when we look here on the continent, we can say a big percentage of the taxpayers' money that is collected goes into paying salaries for ministers or parliamentarians, officials in the government, or rather. What could be done in order to deal with this, in order that this money can be directed towards spurring the economic recovery here on the continent?
You are right. For most African countries, government wage bill consumes a major proportion of their revenue receipts, with major implications for public investment and expenditure. So, for example, in a country like Zambia, 46% of their tax revenue is used to pay the wage bill. But we must not forget that part of this wage bill is paying for critical frontline health workers that are helping the continent navigate this fight against the pandemic. So any change that has to be done with careful consideration. Having said that, we must not let a crisis go to waste. So there are a number of ways in which governments can really take this into account. The first is recognizing that the public sector needs major reforms to be better able to manage the next crisis. This includes rationalizing the size of the public service and really building the capacity of the public service to be a lot more efficient. We are seeing that technology is being used to enhance productivity within the public sector, and it is forcing the public service to be more agile. As we think through building back better, how do you institute policies to ensure the public servants are a lot more efficient? How do you think through more robust ways to ensure that public servants are transparent in their way of engaging with the general public? And there are some very quick wins in the short run. So, for example, you can institute policies to allow public servants to draw on future leave days right now during the pandemic, rather than sitting at home, not doing much for those who are not. You can freeze payments of allowances and benefits to senior public servants, and possibly over time across the board. So there are ways in which you can have short-term measures, but also think through your public sector reform strategy and think through where the real opportunities are for ensuring that you can make savings in the medium to long term.
Yes, you've just touched on policies, and I wonder if it's still, that point is still relevant on this. We've seen foreign debt to African nations has actually increased over the past years, and threats of bankruptcy hover here on the continent. What can be done in order to deal with the rising debt here on the continent? Policy, would you say that that is one of the crucial areas?
So definitely one of the crucial areas, Fiona. So we know that pre-COVID, debt was rising with a number of countries on the continent in debt distress. On average, 22% of government expenditure was going to debt service, and debt to GDP ratios was reaching nearly 60% in some countries. There are four ways in which we believe this can be addressed. The first is a short-term measure. The debt service suspension initiative expires on 31st December 2020. ACET is calling for this to be extended to at least 2021. We understand that G20 finance ministers have agreed to table this idea, but it is not clear what will happen. If this extension does not happen, it will put a large number of countries on the continent in even more trouble. Secondly, special drawing rights. There are a number of proposals to either issue more special drawing rights, allowing more states to borrow from the IMF, or to engineer new allocation and swap of SDR. A new SDR allocation will enable a number of the countries on the continent that are running into foreign exchange reserve difficulties to access hard currencies at low interest rate. So getting the members of the IMF to really vote for an SDR package will help sub-Saharan African countries substantially. Thirdly, we need to reduce the types of expenditure. As you said earlier on, we do have a bloated civil service, but more worryingly, we have overlapping initiatives across ministries, programs that are duplicative. These needs to be streamlined for us to find savings. The next one is, as we think through private sector-led growth, are we making enough progress in facilitating the private sector so that we can grow the economy, generate jobs, and increase our revenue base? And linked to that, can we enable the private sector to provide more services and develop infrastructure? As an example, African governments spend more than 50 billion per year on public funds on infrastructure. This is infrastructure that can be financed by the private sector. And often we borrow short-term bonds to fund these long-term needs. If we could do more in facilitating the private sector to make these investments, all of these things will contribute into reducing our debt in the long run.
Yes, now during the conversation, you've actually touched on the importance of moving towards ICT, adopting digital tools. But looking at all these, how can they be sustained to even a post-COVID-19 period?
So, I mean, the great thing about what was happening on the continent was that digital innovations was growing. We saw tech hubs in Lagos, Nairobi, and Accra attracting Silicon Valley innovation competitions. And we saw the emergence of platforms like Irembo, Ushahidi, Mkopa, Mtiba. But the distinctive feature of any crisis is that it can accelerate otherwise slow-moving trends, and they can be harnessed to facilitate those seeking to create positive change. There are three ways in which this can be fast-tracked. There are three ways in which governments can ensure that digital innovation is not just able to help us navigate the crisis, but can create opportunities for economic transformation, ensure sustained and resilient growth, and most importantly, create much needed jobs on the continent. Firstly, crowd in venture capital for entrepreneurs. African countries should be encouraging venture capital funding to foster entrepreneurship and accelerate advances in technology and innovation. So in 2018, 150 digital startups mobilized 1.6 billion across Africa. It sounds like a lot, Fiona, but it's not. Compare it to 7 billion in India in the same year and 70 billion in China in the same year. We can do a lot more. Secondly, support an innovation ecosystem. Currently, there are lots of tech hubs, there are startups, telephone companies, governments, digital spaces, all working in isolation. These need to be replaced by greater integration of services and platforms and a shift to a more integrated ecosystem. This will enhance the prospects for economic transformation. So in 2019, there were 620 active tech hubs across the continent, and most of them were disconnected from government policy and from each other. Thirdly, governments can facilitate this process by developing comprehensive innovation policies. A few countries have these: Kenya, Mauritius, Morocco, South Africa. But there are a number of countries that do not have clear, comprehensive digital or innovation strategies in place that can support the growth and development of this critical sector that will not just ensure that Africa is fast-tracked in its ambition on economic diversification, but more importantly, it generates job creation. And for example, we know that jobs that are created in the digital sector tends to benefit women. So really try to use that to create more sustained long-term opportunities.